Well, good morning and welcome again to our online Bible study. Our theme has been Your Kingdom Come, Your Will Be Done on earth as it is in heaven. We have been tasked by the Lord Himself to bring the kingdom of God into reality on the face of this earth. It's up to us. Who else is going to do it? Certainly those that do not know the Lord, they're not going to do it. It is our task. It's like what Esther's uncle said to her, who knows but that you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So who knows but that we have come to this period of history for such a time as this. This is a very historic time. This is a make it or break it situation that we either turn back the hand that has been leading us down the path to destruction, or we turn things around and we begin to manifest the kingdom of God here upon this earth. Maybe not perfectly, surely not, but we will bring it back in that direction. The pendulum has swung too far to the left, and we need to bring it back to where it needs to be. So today our subtopic is believing a lie. Believing a lie. You know, deception is the greatest tool that the enemy has. It dates back all the way to the Garden of Eden. This was the tool that Satan, when he possessed the body of the serpent, and he deceived Eve into believing or planting a seed of doubt about the goodness of the Lord. And he's been using this tool ever since. It's very effective because I think the thing is that we intuitively, we want to believe that if people tell us something, that they're telling us the truth. And for most of us who are decent, who are surely the children of God, we want to represent things correctly. We want to tell people what is right. You know, we don't want to try to deceive them. We don't want to try to give them lies. And we would hope that that's the way that people would treat us. But that is not true. Those that have not given themselves to the Lord, and those who have given themselves to Satan, they have no qualms whatsoever in just spewing out lies and telling it as if it is the truth. So we're going to deal with that in this lesson, and we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 9, verses 1 through 15. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the Great Sea, that's talking about the Mediterranean, towards Lebanon, which is north of Israel, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this. They gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. What did they hear? They heard about what Joshua and the people of Israel had done to Jericho and the little town of Ai. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they, on their part, acted with cunning. In other words, they were deceptive. They went and made ready provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, We have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a covenant with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They said to him, "From a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, We are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey.' So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them." Now, here is the scenario. Let us set the stage for this. Of course, Joshua is the one of two people that survived the 40 years of the desert wanderings of the children of Israel from the time they left Egypt until they actually did begin to take possession of the promised land. So 40 years. Joshua's been around a long time. But Moses died, right? And Joshua had been tasked by the Lord to go in and conquer the promised land. So that's why the book of Joshua begins with these words in chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea," talking about the Mediterranean, "towards the going down of the sun, towards the east, towards the west, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you." So Moses had died, and Moses never got to enter into the promised land. He got to see it from a distance. He was able to go up on a mountain and look across, but he never entered into the promised land. But it was Joshua whom the Lord gave that opportunity and that responsibility to go in and take possession of the land. So Joshua and his army had crossed the red line, quote unquote, of the Jordan River. They had crossed over the Jordan River, and they had begun their assignment of claiming the land of Canaan. So we know that they had a miraculous victory at Jericho. We all know the stories of how Joshua and his men marched around the city for 7 days, and on the seventh day they marched around it 7 times. They blew the shofars, and the walls came tumbling down. So they were able to conquer Jericho very quickly. Then they went to a little town called Ai. Well, it was kind of an embarrassing situation there. And it shouldn't have required it, but it required 2 military engagements to, to defeat that little village. But they were able to take control of those 2 areas of Jericho and Ai. So, just like God said, that they were to do it little by little, step by step. And that's what they were doing. They were taking it one town, one location at a time. They weren't trying to conquer the whole land all at once. You got giants in these lands. These people are strong, they are powerful. So yeah, let's take it a step at a time. So word began to spread quickly to the inhabitants of the land about what the Israelites were doing. And naturally, this was disturbing news to all the different people groups living in Canaan. And when they heard the news, then they began to make plans of how they were going to stop this invasion. So many of them were joining forces together. They didn't normally join forces together, but because of the threat that they were all facing, they joined forces together, and they were talking about how they were going to come against the Israelites militarily. But the Gibeonites, they didn't want to do that. For whatever reason, I mean, we can speculate as to why they didn't want to do that. But we have to ask ourselves, who were the Gibeonites? Where did they live? Well, according to Wikipedia, you can also look it up in Bible dictionaries as well, because that's where they get their source of information. But it says Gibeon is described as a large city. It's like one of the royal cities. And it was located in what would later become the territory of the tribe of Benjamin. There is a story later on, hundreds of years later, when King Saul is the first king of Israel. Like I said, this is like 500 years later, where King Saul almost massacred the Gibeonites. You'll have to read that story for yourself, but because King Saul did that, he brought the people of Judah under a curse as a result. But nevertheless, Gibeon also was later given as a city that was given to the Levites. The Levites didn't own any particular area. They were just given certain cities out from the different tribes. Each tribe was allocated a certain portion of the land of Israel once the land was conquered, and they would give certain cities to the Levites to live in. So this was one of those cities that would later become a city for the Levites. But what did the land look like? What did Gibeon look like? Well, it was flat and fertile, and it had many springs, and it had a flourishing economy. And there's been a lot of archaeological digs in that area, and they found a large number of ancient jars and wine cellars that were discovered there. So, but where was Gibeon? Where did they live? Where was their home? Well, they were just located north of Jerusalem, and they lived within 3 days' walk of where Joshua and his men were at Gilgal. 3 days walk. It wasn't far. So they were not that far from the Israelites. And I guess, we're speculating again, but they knew that their days may be numbered. They weren't very far from being invaded by the Israelites. And perhaps they didn't have the time or the resources to amass an army that quickly to come against Joshua and his army. So what were they going to do? How were they going to handle this situation? What was their plan? If plan A is not going to work, what is plan B? So what was their plan? Deception. Deception. How powerful is deception? How powerful is that? So in verse 3 it says, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, so Joshua and his people, they were only getting started on their conquest of the promised land. They had only conquered 2 cities. But verse 4, they, talking about the Gibeonites, on their part, acted with cunning or deception, and went and make ready provisions, and took worn out sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn out patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, we've come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. So here are the Gibeonites pretending to be from far away, who had heard about what the Lord had done for them in Egypt and all along the way, and what Joshua and his men had accomplished so far in Canaan. And they didn't want to have conflict with the Israelites. And so they came and they wanted to make a peace treaty with Joshua and with the people of Israel. But we have the blessing of being able to look back, and we have hindsight. Hindsight is better than foresight a lot of times. So we can look back on this and we can analyze it, and we can say, well, this raises their deception, their cunning. It raises some interesting questions. Number one, how long would you have to travel to wear out sandal bags, wineskins, sandals, and clothes? Well, certainly not days. And probably months, more likely years before that would happen. It said about the Israelites that their sandals never wore out. Their clothes didn't wear out. And they had been in the wilderness for 40 years. So how long do you think, if you were just thinking about this, and they were saying, when we started out, these were new, and look at them now. Well, how big is the nation of Israel? It's no bigger than the state of New Jersey. Now, I don't know if the Israelites knew that at the time. I know that they had scouted out the land of Israel 40 years earlier. I know that Joshua was one of those spies. I don't know if they went all the way around the territory or not, but they did scout it out to see what it was like. But certainly they should have known that the nation was not that large. I mean, the size of New Jersey. And for hear the Gibeonites to say, oh, when we started out on this journey, everything was new, but look at it now. We've worn it out. Well, how long would they have had to travel for that to have happened? Not a few days. Like I said, you're talking about years. And the Israelites have just begun conquering the Promised Land. So they haven't been in the Promised Land that long. But they wanted to say, oh, well, we heard about you all the way back in Egypt. You know, that's what they were bringing up. And so the Israelites were in Egypt 40 years earlier. Are you saying that you started your journey 40 years earlier or years before because of what you'd heard about the Israelites? Well, from our perspective, this would seem not a good plausible answer here to say, oh, well, everything was new when we started out, and look at it now. Like I said, how long had the Israelites been fighting the Canaanites? They had marched around Jericho 7 days before the walls came tumbling down, and then they went to Ai with a very short-term engagement. So they hadn't been there very long in their conquest. Now, if the Gibeonites' provisions were dry and crumbly from their long journey, why hadn't they bought fresh supplies along the way? How long could you sustain yourself without food and water? They're saying that when they started out, here was our food. It was fresh out of the oven. And they're saying that, oh, our saddlebags wore out and wineskins are tore up and our sandals are coming all to pieces. Food wouldn't have lasted that long. They would have had to resupply themselves somewhere along the line. You know, from our perspective, if, we can look at it from hindsight and say, this just doesn't add up. Now, if the Gibeonites lived in a distant country, why did they want to come to where the Israelites were to be their servants? They said, we want to be your servants. If they lived that far away, why would they want to be the servants of Israel? That doesn't make sense. Surely they would have, if they lived that far away, they would have teamed up with some others and wanted to militarily fight the Israelites. So there's a lot of things about what they were telling Joshua and the elders of Israel that just does not make sense. But Joshua and the elders of Israel, they were honest men, and they wanted to take these men at face value. They wanted to trust these men. They didn't want to begin to question them and say, are you serious? Just how far do you live from here? How long have you been traveling? And, so they didn't question them, and they didn't pray about it. They didn't ask these critical questions. They just simply took them at their word. And I think that's the way a lot of people are, is that we just want to assume that people will tell us the truth. We just don't want to believe that people are liars. If you go to purchase something and you deal with a salesperson, you want to assume that they're not going to tell you something that's not the truth. Well, they're going to tell you things that you want to hear, and it's not necessarily the truth. And we just take it and say, well, that's just the way they are. But here's what The scripture tells us, but they, talking about Joshua and the elders, they did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them. So they gave them their word. They entered into a peace treaty with them. Now, just think how foolish that they felt not long after this when they found out. I mean, it didn't take them long to find out that the Gibeonites only lived 3 days away from where they were right there. But unfortunately, they had already given their word, and they couldn't do anything about it at that point because of their integrity and because of what the Lord taught the Jewish people, is that if you give your word, you can't go back on it. It's better not to make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it. So they had entered into a peace covenant with them, and from their religious standpoint, they could not go back on that. They couldn't do anything about it except to make the Gibeonites their servants. And so they assigned them as woodcutters and water carriers, and they cursed them to work forever in these trades. And they were okay with that. They were able to survive. They lived. So they were okay with being servants. They were okay with being woodcutters and manual laborers. That was all right with them. At least they got to live. Theologian John Gill suggests that this curse was a particular example of the curse which Noah inflicted on all of Canaan. When it said, Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants. He shall be to his brethren." And that was certainly true with the Gibeonites. They became the servants of the descendants of Shem. So you had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the ancestor of Canaan. And Canaan, they became servants to their brothers. So Canaan became the servant to Shem, to the descendants of Shem, which would be the Israelites. We want to bring this home, though, as to what we're facing in our own country. Like I said, most of us, we want to believe when people tell us something. And when we hear something on the news or on the television or on the internet, we want to be able to believe what we're being told. But unfortunately, for a long time there was a lot of integrity with news sources that they had to be careful, very careful, to make sure that their stories were accurate and that they were not misleading or that they were not distorted. That journalists and investigative reporters had to do their homework and had to make sure that everything was as it was supposed to be. But unfortunately, that's not the case of the mainstream media today. As we hear, we're just being inundated with deception day after day after day. And from what we've discovered is that these, what they call talking heads, they speak from a script that is given to them. And you listen to the news from the different news sources, and they're all saying exactly the same words. And it's because that's what they've been scripted to say. When Donald Trump became the president, things changed big time. He was not a politician. He did not play the game that the politicians in Washington and the news media play. The news media have been the propaganda machine for those that have been in power for some time now, unfortunately. But Donald Trump, when he came into office, he didn't need any of the bribes. He didn't need any of the kickbacks. He had already made his fortune in business, and he didn't need anything, and he didn't need the salary. He gives his salary away every year. He doesn't need it. And so he can't be bought like a lot of politicians have been bought. In times past, we've had presidents. One thing that they have done is gone to Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi Arabian princes, they have really lined their pockets very well. And then, in the Middle East, these politicians have grown rich, millionaires and billionaires as a result of just robbing and stealing and killing and taking from those that have not and giving it to the rich. It's like, Robin Hood, steal from the rich to give to the poor, but in this instance is robbing from the poor to give to the rich. So foreign entities like Saudi Arabia or China, they have lined the pockets of our politicians. Why do certain politicians, why are they multimillionaires? They're not getting it from their salary as a congressperson in Washington or from any of their positions that they might hold in the political realm. They're getting it as kickbacks from different foreign entities. And so they've sold America out. And that's why jobs have been taken from America and has been hijacked and taken overseas. But Trump doesn't play that game. And so he's a thorn in their flesh. And they hate him because he's turning over the apple cart, so to speak. He's exposing their corruption. And they hate him. They hate him. Their hatred knows no bounds. They know that Trump is going to expose and bring down their corruption. And that their walls are going to come tumbling down like the walls of Jericho. And they're kicking and screaming and hollering and everything else. They had an investigation that lasted over 2 years, or around 2 years, trying to pin something on our president. They spent millions of dollars on that. But there was absolutely no evidence. Nothing that they could bring to convict him of any crimes. And yet they still spew forth the same old lies, hoping that if they say it long enough and loud enough, that we're going to believe it, regardless of the facts. And unfortunately, not everyone will think for themselves or weigh carefully the facts. They won't question things. They just listen to what the celebrities tell them, and so they take that as what they need to believe. But that's not what we're to do. What did Jesus teach us? He said, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." Wolves want to kill the sheep. But Jesus said, "So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." In other words, don't take everything at face value. Do your own research. Ask your own questions. Does this make sense? Are they telling the truth to us? What is the truth? We're not to hate our enemies, no. But that doesn't mean that we're not to expose their deception, and that there is justice, that we are to allow the justice system to handle it, not ourselves. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. It's not up to us to take vengeance, but we are to let the judicial process take have its way. I mean, it takes time to get all the evidence together and make sure that all who are involved are prosecuted according to the law. We want justice. We want truth. We want justice. That's what we're about. Jesus said the truth will set you free. And the truth is going to set us free when it's all said and done with what's happening in our country. But this is the time. I mean, the enemy, he's used his best tool on the American people, and that is deception. He's been deceiving us for decades now. And he doesn't like it that he's being exposed. And we just need to pray. We need to pray that justice will be served. We need to pray that those who have committed murder, rape, violence, when they've taken from the poor and given it to the rich, when they've disrupted whole countries, displaced them, when they've created terrorism in the world just so that they can line their pockets. This is wrong. And God's not pleased with it. But again, we have to understand. I mean, I hate to even delve into the mind of someone that is a liar or a deceiver. I don't want to even have to try to put myself in their shoes. Why would they do that? Just for what they can gain. It's all about them and not about others. So we need to pray. We need to do our homework. We don't need to be gullible like Joshua and the elders of Israel and believe every lie or deception that comes at us. We need to find out, hey, this doesn't make sense. I mean, this doesn't line up. I mean, you're going to have to do some explaining here. The dots, they don't come together here. So we need to have a more critical analysis of what people say to us. Not that we're trying to be negative, or not that we're trying to question everyone's integrity, but we do need to make sure that those who are telling us things are being truthful in what they say, because there is so much deception in our world today. So we need to vet it. We need to make sure that we're being given a truthful answer. So I do pray for the president, and I pray for the attorney generals that are at work to bring justice. I know that the corruption and the evil is slowly being removed from the whole process. There have been hundreds, if not more, of people who have resigned or been fired or no longer have those positions for whatever reason. But they're removing the people that have been using deception in our government. It's going on. It's not being reported. But again, we need to have our eyes and ears open, and we have to have an open mind and not take everything at face value, but ask the right questions so that we can get to the truth. And not just believe something just because a celebrity tells us to believe it. or someone that we look up to or we may admire. We have to say, are they really telling us the truth about this? So pray about this and pray that our country will not be deceived and not end up in the shape that Israel did there. They were to go, God said, destroy the enemy, but here they instead allowed the enemy to live. They made them servants, yes, but it wasn't what God had told them. He said, you need to clean this up. You know, we call it drain the fill in the blank. We need to drain it. We need to drain the corruption, the deception out of our whole political system and our justice system. And make sure that there is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness within our nation. So, God bless you. And I just ask that God would give you the discernment and the wisdom to understand truth from a lie. In Jesus' name, amen.